Hello, everyone. So delighted that you're joining us for this conversation about how to talk about race in the workplace. Just to give some context, we're recording this very important conversation today in July of 2020. And I say that because depending on when you actually see this, we want to set some framework for this conversation. Clearly, we're now out about 5 or 6 weeks after George Floyd's death. We've seen the world's attention on addressing racial inequity, and we've seen a lot of companies and government agencies and other entities want to now make a concerted effort to address racial inequity. As part of this environment that we find ourselves in now in July, we also understand that there are company leaders who are struggling with how to talk about race in the workplace. And so we have brought together some of our experts. I'm Michele Ruiz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Biassync, and both Dr. Atira Charles and Dr. Bentley Gibson are two of our experts who work with our clients in the work that we do to guide them to create more fair and respectful workplaces. Now, to give you a little bit of background on both of our experts, Dr. Bentley Gibson received her doctorate in cognition and development psychology at Emory University. She's currently an associate professor in psychology at Georgia Highlands College. She does a lot of her own research around implicit bias, unconscious bias, and the reduction of it in particular as it focuses in children, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Atira Charles, you can actually find her TEDx talk online, which is, and the name is?
Rethinking Diversity and Inclusion as a Health and Wellness Dilemma.
As a health and wellness dilemma. Such an important reframing of that conversation. She is a sought out, highly dynamic speaker and consultant around diversity, equity, and inclusion. She works with a lot of Fortune 500 organizations. Of course, she works with a lot of our clients, and they are Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. And she's very focused as part of her research and work on identity and diversity related to being in the workplace. So our purpose today is really to kind of shed some light, and I'll share this with both of you, but also for those of us who are watching. We've heard from our clients, please help us, because we are struggling with how to talk about race. We have employees of all different racial backgrounds and different lenses, different identities who have different perspectives about it. We have leaders, same thing, different perspectives, and there's a lot of emotion and other things that are occurring in the workplace. So I'd like to start with you, Dr. Charles. What is your assessment of the state as it pertains to this issue about talking about race in the workplace right now?
Hi, everybody. So I think that we're about 5 to 6 weeks in, and I beg to say if you ask me that question at each week, my answer would be a bit different. Because I think, like many, when the social shifts started to happen, there was skepticism. Skepticism of if it was reactive, skepticism if organizations truly wanted to start doing the work. There started becoming a lot of, let's just say, unmasking of some of the histories and truths of different corporations and the ways that they've been. There was social media activism, kind of highlighting where companies went wrong. And so cynicism really drove, I think, a lot of the earlier times. I think what we're moving into now is an awakening of, I may not know what, I may not know where we're going, but I want to do something now. And so I'm seeing more authentic displays of corporate interest with saying, while we may have ignored this conversation internally, I'm ready to take the step now.
And Dr. Gibson, what are you seeing and hearing based on the work that you're doing?
I have to totally agree with Dr. Charles. When I first started, I was more on the negative emotional side and skeptical, upset. But after talking with people and seeing that, I call them newcomers to the table, that there's an awakening and awareness and people who are willing to discuss this now and get out of that colorblind ideology, like, oh no, I don't see color. Now they see color all of a sudden and are willing to talk about it. So that makes me actually really hopeful. And you mentioned emotion. I think it's really important to, during this time, I like to tell people kind of take the emotion and put them somewhere else. Because if you focus too much on emotion when dealing with a topic like race, that could decrease awareness, particularly negative emotions, right? It's already a difficult topic. And if you make it too difficult, right, and get defensive, angry, reactive, that's going to decrease awareness. So one of the main things I tell people as a psychologist is to come to the table talking about this topic, and as much as a positive space as you can. It's already difficult, and try to, as much as you can, suppress negative emotions, because that could decrease the quality of the conversation you're having and the ability for you to increase awareness.
And to that point, the three emotions that I've been seeing come up have been shame, blame, and guilt.
Yes.
And all people of all identities are feeling all of those in a different type of way. And I think that members of stereotyped, stigmatized, biased groups have unfortunately practiced with those negative emotions related to race. What I'm seeing is that our white colleagues that have not been newcomers, or that are newcomers, are now having to face a flood of emotions about what they're now seeing, hearing, learning. And I think where that's coming through is, of course, a lot of organizations, like some of the workshops we facilitate through Biassync, are giving coworkers and colleagues and teammates an opportunity to share their stories different.
That's right.
And so they're hearing narratives they never heard before. And that guilt and shame, and I'm using this based off of words and feedback from people that they've shared, has become either a motivation to do more, or is actually pushing some back,
right,
and saying, this is a bit too much for me right now. But we're not in a season where we have room for anybody to push back. Everyone has to pull forward in order to build these inclusive climates and cultures that we're trying to gain.
And moving forward, even if it's uncomfortable, because that's where the real work happens, right?
Exactly.
Because I can imagine, just based on the feedback I'm getting from some of our clients and the company leaders and our clients, is that, wow, this is so challenging, but we need to have this conversation. What I really need help with is how to have this conversation, but it can be uncomfortable, right? It can be depending on where you sit.
And I tell people to sit in that uncomfortability, sit in it, be okay in it, right? Don't run from it, kind of wrap yourself around it, embrace it. And that's when I say, find a positive space in that uncomfortable moment. The positive side is you're trying something new, you're learning new things, right? And you're going to come out of it a better person. So sitting in there is really helpful.
And I would beg to say that corporate leaders have to understand that for people to sit in it, there has to be time.
Right.
So 30-minute conversations aren't going to solve the dilemma. One training alone is not going to solve the dilemma. I think organizations have to start to take a more long-term approach and investment into doing this work. And I think historically, a lot of this work has been rooted in legal compliance, right? If we're being honest. And the One Black History Month event a year where you pay a keynote to come speak. And that's really what's driven a lot of corporate activity with this. But I think now what we're seeing is, this is going to take more time. I did a 4-hour training with a client the other day, and the feedback on the report back was, we needed more time. And it's like, yes, I always say we don't go to college for one day. We don't go to therapy for one day. We don't talk out a difficult family situation in one day.
That's right.
And so we have to be willing to keep the conversation and dialogue going and connect it to accountability and action.
Right. And we didn't develop these biases in just one day, right? We developed over our whole childhood. And so now we have to get in there and do the work individually, but also collectively as organizations. And the great thing about Biassync is it's a long-term relationship. We're constantly providing content that will help individuals and companies mitigate these biases. Think about them, learn how to talk about them, not just a one-time training.
Right.
Exactly.
And then also making sure
Yes.
And then also making sure that we're holding their hand along the way. Because I think a lot of organizations can feel alone. It's like, wait, you just unearthed all of this with my people, and now what, right? And so we want to make sure that organizations know that they have places like Biassync where they can come and get that A to Z pathway to really building that inclusive space.
Yes, and we can talk more about that, about our approach, because it is a long-term approach, and it's a very holistic approach in terms of how we here at Biassync help our clients through this, and also mitigating bias. So let's talk a little bit about a scenario. I want to talk a couple different scenarios. The first scenario is you have organization leaders in a company, and they hear, chatter around, obviously perspectives around the protests, perspectives around George Floyd's death, and even maybe perspectives around what they perceive their company is or is not doing. But they're not necessarily saying, oh, we need to have a conversation about race. What should they know if it's not on their radar? What would you say? Dr. Gibson, what would you say?
I would start by saying that you're going to be an outlier, okay? We're in a society now, it's a new day. We had a lot of people with that whole colorblind ideology before, but now I would say the majority of folks have woken up and said, we're not going to have this anymore. So I would say if you want to be an outlier, go ahead and do that, but you're going to lose interactions with people, relationships, business. It's just, you're not going to be your best self that way. Your organization is not going to be at its best. And so we're in a new society today. So you can either get with the times where we are or be an outlier and stick with the whole colorblind, I don't want to talk about this. But it's really not going to be best for the individual or for organizations as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say for corporate leaders, uncertainty leads to anxiety and stress, right? We know that ambiguity leads to anxiety and stress. There is an unknowingness, an ambiguity around, if I take this big, bold step, what will that mean for me as leader in this position? What will that mean for my organization? What will the board think of me? What will my peers think of me? Will they think I'm being dramatic? Will they think I'm doing too much when I go ask for more resources to do this? So there's going to be a lot of personal questioning that leaders go through as they figure out how to strategize on doing this work. And so I would just say to that leader, you'll get more clarity and less ambiguity doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't do the work, then the unknown brings us to where we've been, which clearly hasn't solved the dilemma. And so take a step into that brief moment of ambiguity of what will occur and know that you're operating, doing the better thing
Mm-hmm.
in the end.
I had a client that's making me think of that before meeting with them, I've had kind of like a backstory and knew that they had struggled with racial issues. And when I met with them at the end, this is what really gave me hope. They said, I just want to learn. I wasn't thinking about this before, but now I'm at a place where I just want to learn. Sign me up. Okay. So that to me gave me hope in terms of even people who were not thinking about this before are now just are willing to learn. And so if you're not at that place, you're going to be an outlier. So I say it's best for you to just get on board here, or you're going to really suffer individually as a person in terms of who you can connect with and your organization.
And would you think, oh yes, go ahead.
And that connects to humility, right? And so often leaders are highly educated, have the experience to get to those decision-making roles, CEO, president, VPs of HR, chief diversity officers, VPs of learning and development, all those key roles that are
just managers in general.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so there's this thought of you should know. Mm-hmm. And I think that senior leadership has to give their colleagues room to know that it's okay to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Because this is it's a new energy around this. Mm-hmm. And I also say, back to those negative emotions, move away from guilt on the assumption that you haven't been doing. Because I can say this, I know a lot of VPs of learning and development and chief diversity officers that have been pushing and pulling for resourcing to do the work who just weren't given the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And the resources, exactly.
Or the resources. Mm-hmm. And so now there's this overflow, right, of interest. And so I'd also say give some grace to your teammates who have been assigned to this work, and now this all feels very different as well.
Yes. So there's a scenario that was described to me where, actually two different scenarios that I want to share with you. The first is a Caucasian leader. We know there are many, obviously, Caucasian leaders who struggle wondering if they even have the credibility to have a conversation around race, right? So what's important for them to know?
We need a partner in anything else. We can't self-diagnose our health issues.
Mm-hmm.
We can't self-diagnose our emotional and psychological challenges. We can't build the house and fix the pipe. Like, we call help.
That's right.
So many things. And I think historically people have acted like this work is easy or on the edge or, you know, just kind of adjacent to core work process. But I think what they're now seeing is, oh, this isn't so easy, is it?
That's
right? And so I think, you know, partner with somebody, because the answer is you can't do it alone. You're right.
That's right.
So what do? You get help and you get assistance and you get guidance and you get advice and you get counsel and you get all of those things. Because if you're not trained in it, then you don't know. I'd also say for leaders to be aware of not just tapping people in the organization who are brown or a woman to all of a sudden start leading the work too. Because there's an emotional and workload there's anecdotal and now becoming research evidence that women of color and people of color in organizations are carrying extra workload now trying to solve these problems.
And in our personal lives too.
Right.
It's just
without compensation, without titles, without, any type of release on other roles. And so let's be careful of not saying, oh, I need help. Let me grab what's easy.
Right. And also just to talk on that, you know, we're not dealing with rocket scientists here, right? We're all human beings. We understand what it is to be a human being. We can pull from our own identities, right? So what I challenge people to do is, no, you're not an expert in this. Yes, you need to seek expert advice because you're not, but you are human. And you can go back to your childhood and think about, you know, what did you learn about race? Who were your parents around? And kind of just do a Freudian analysis, I like to say, of yourself and what your experiences have been with race. You know these things instead of acting like and putting in the back of your mind that it has not taken place or that it doesn't exist, but really just thinking about where you are and have been in terms of race. I think is a great starting place for the individual so that they actually bring this to the front of the brain instead of the back and realize, hey, I do have something to say about this, even as a white person, right? Yeah. They've had experiences as a white person that they can now think about and relate to Black people and being Black in America. For example, I like to have white participants think about areas in which they don't have privilege. Maybe it's socioeconomic status, right? Maybe it's your sexuality. Maybe you've been to prison before, but I don't know that unless you tell me. And once you may not tell me because you know there's a negative stigma behind that. And so with that, you might be able to empathize with me being Black, and that's not a concealable identity. That's something I'm walking into the room with. So what I ask people to do is just go where you are, what you've been through, and try to tap that in and empathize and relate to what it means to be Black.
And it makes me think, first of all, I think that's extraordinarily insightful. And it makes me think, listen, you don't have to be of a certain type to have it to show up as a leader and have a meaningful conversation around race. Just like leaders at whatever point in their managerial or leadership journey, they learned how to, as an example, interview and hire or review people. This is something that with guidance, and that's the guidance that we offer, they can actually have a meaningful conversation around race. They don't have to be particular. They don't have to be brown. They don't have to be every leader, whatever color, whatever perspective they bring to the table, can show up and have a constructive conversation around race. And the work that we do collectively with our clients is provide them the framework to have that conversation, right? Just like they have frameworks for other processes and other things they do as leaders.
And they took what they learned before into learning these new processes. It's the same thing. You have experiences, even as a white person or somebody who may not be of color, that you can take and bring into this process. And so don't shy away just because you're not Black.
And I think, that yes, 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 and yes to everything that was just said. And that's why I always tell clients, before you didn't see D&I as a core work process. Now what you're feeling is that same angst you would have about sales, or that same angst about R&D, or that same angst around the right marketing ad. The angst you're feeling on this is appropriate and similar because now there's risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we care about all those other things I first listed, because there's risk. And now I think because of the social shift, leaders now say, oh, if we don't get this right, it's a liability.
Right. Branding is going to go off, marketing, all of it's going to be not right if we don't get this right.
Yes. Yeah. And I believe that there's a risk factor in coming across or being perceived as if you're tone deaf, right? And so, and tone deaf can be perceived if a leader or leaders shy away from having the conversation simply because they're uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. They feel like they're not properly equipped, but that could have a negative perspective, whether or not someone's knocking on their door. I guess in this case of pandemic and we're all virtual and those kinds of things, pinging. But the point is that by stepping back and not saying or doing something and stepping into a leadership role to have a meaningful conversation, it could be perceived as tone deaf or not caring or insensitive, or would you agree?
Yes, hands down.
Oh yes, and because no one has held anybody accountable before. Mm-hmm. So being tone deaf was fine. Just like Dr. Gibson was saying, being colorblind before was fine. Just doing the bring your favorite culture food to work was fine. There were things that were just fine before.
That now, one Black employee, we have one, isn't that fine? Isn't that good?
Right. And issues of tokenism. And now you're one, this is what's happening. Your one or two tokens are now using their voice.
That's right.
In a different way. And I think we've all seen that on some of these calls and dialogues we've been on. And people are saying that, oh my gosh, I didn't know you felt that way. Mm-hmm. And that is personalizing it now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what any human needs to truly understand, the personalized nature of it. Mm-hmm. I tell people, you can wake up and be a good, nice person with a smile and still not be an ally.
That's right.
You can wake up a good person with a smile and be a nice person and still not do good anti-racist work. Right?
Right.
So it takes, just like we train for other behaviors and competencies and skills, this is now a new skill set and set of tools that every employee and leader needs in the workplace now. Right. It's just a necessity.
Yeah. And if you're just sitting in this guilt and shame and desire to want to see yourself as a good person, you might be missing the mark and not going out there and getting the experiences to counteract your biases, right? Mm-hmm. To really see Black people differently, right? You can't make this about yourself and just wanting to, as you say, wake up and smile and be a good person, but you can't be an ally if you're not focusing on getting new information and new experiences about this negatively stereotyped group.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So one of the things I'm also hearing, you kind of alluded to it, Dr. Charles, a few moments ago, which is the extra pressure, burden, responsibility, and frankly, stress that is being felt by, in particular, Black employees or Black leaders in an organization. So I do want to touch upon that for a moment. So we've heard through our clients, and this is some of the work that we're guiding them through, is that they're Black employees and or Black leaders because they're Black, and obviously the focus right now in July of 2020 is on addressing racial injustice and racial inequity, that others in the organization, in particular other leaders, are looking to them to be the answer to everything, the knowledge source, the resource, how do we do this? All kinds of things. So let's talk about the top things that leaders need to understand what's happening and the stress that's happening to, in particular, Black employees and team members in a company in many instances.
So the first thing I would say is don't assume because your colleague is Black that they're a diversity expert. Mm-hmm. They are an expert in their life. They are an expert in their lived experience. But we also then have to understand that that's not homogenous either. Myself and Dr. Gibson are both younger, educated African-American women, but I'm sure our stories and journeys have looked different. We probably have some things we differ on, may have an opinion that changes on certain things. And so it's important that if you don't have a diversified workforce, and if we're being honest in the US context, most people don't have diversified social circles either, that you're now relying on that one person to speak for a whole population. And I think we have to be very careful with that because you can also get the wrong one. that has the view of, I haven't seen this. That's not been my story. No, that's not true.
That's right.
I promise you, history says that's a lie. And so, it's important for us to make sure that we diversify even the voices that we're tapping on, and understand this: by forcing the load on your Black leaders and employees, you're actually giving your non-Black employees a competitive advantage, because they're able to navigate through their day with performance and productivity in a more focused way, in a way that doesn't have this extra service role that they're playing. And so if you're not comfortable with that idea, then you shouldn't be comfortable with the load hitting your Black talent either.
Oh, that's such a valuable insight, because right, most companies are trying to focus on what do we do and do the right thing, and not recognizing that if they're doing the wrong thing, as in relying on someone that just visibly shows up because their skin is brown or Black, that they may actually be putting them at a disadvantage.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, so insightful. Thank you.
Very.
Dr. Gibson, what's your perspective on
I
it?
say, going back to that homogenous, us being a homogenous group, Black people, right? I think that people need to get outside of that, get to know many different experiences. Yeah, me and Dr. Charles are different, but we may have some similarities too. So that goes back to how many do you know? And then once you start seeing the similarities in those experiences, oh, I've had to do this to get to where I am now, then that's when you say, aha, something's going on here. But if you're just using that one person and their lived experiences, you're not going to get to see the variability in all that is the beauty of Blackness. And it's really, it's really limiting people into their ability to communicate with others and to have a good organization.
Not to mention, by the way, that they may not be the ones who want to step up into that role. Right. And they're feeling stressed and they're feeling pressured. I've even heard, I haven't yet seen research, but just anecdotally, that's, based on what our clients are reporting to us, and our clients are large Fortune 500 companies, that they're starting to identify that their African-American employees, some of them are actually feeling additional stress, that they're almost on the verge of wanting to take a leave or thinking about taking a leave, because the stress is so great.
Because it's personal and it's professional. That's a double whammy. I mean, I feel it all the time in this space, but that's my job, right?
There you go. I chose, but it's my job.
That's right.
That's your area of expertise.
That's right. I chose to do this.
That's your area. That's why you work with our clients.
That's right.
It is your area of expertise.
That's right.
So the other thing I think that's important to talk about is the issue around when you try to stay away from this conversation, that you can actually make some missteps, and that can lead to the wrong impression. So it's not just not having the conversation, but inadvertently showing a lack of empathy or openness can actually have detrimental effects, and I've heard anecdotally in those situations can lead to an HR complaint. So I'll give an example that was shared with me by one of our large companies. They had a manager that was part of an online conversation, whether it was email or internal chat function, and individuals were talking about their perspectives around the protests, and a leader said, please don't involve me in these conversations any longer. So we don't know, because we've not spoken to that leader, what that leader's intention was when he communicated that. But nevertheless, maybe he just, was distracted by, lots of conversation. Maybe he thought it was taking him off task. Who knows? Maybe he just didn't want to be involved. The bottom line is that the others, as part of that group conversation, felt like he was dismissive of them, and it actually led to a complaint. And so there are things that are happening with leaders that are not either well equipped or just may inadvertently be doing things that may be sending the wrong signal, creating some issues. So would be interested in knowing from the two of you, what do you see along those lines, and just high level, if we could give one or two tips around what to keep in mind for leaders.
I would just say, first off, you have to put it at the forefront of the table, okay? And realize you're not an expert and reach out to the experts in terms of this is what I need to do. So just letting employees know, look, I'm not perfect, but I'm making this a priority now, because if you don't, that alone will be taken personally. I've heard many clients say, these people are talking about their pets and COVID, but they've said nothing about Black Lives Matter, right? And so that alone has made some people not even be able to sleep at night, not even want to go to work conferences and calls because they feel like they're not cared about. So the first thing is just making it known that you are willing to learn, like that client of mine said, right? And you are making this a priority in the organization. And then the next step is reaching out to Biassync, hopefully, right? And we're the experts to help you, because you don't know maybe what to do or what's the right effective way to address bias and create cultural change. That's where the experts come in.
Mm-hmm. And I'd also say, let's make sure that we set the expectation of engagement on this in organizations, right? And I think that's especially important in Zoom land, because Zoom land allows people to hide, metaphorically and actually. So someone can unmute themselves, they can tap their video off and not engage. But I think organizations have to set some norms around what engagement looks like when having these conversations. Because I've heard from some clients that there have been some people that have said, oh, well, I don't like that I have to speak. I don't like that I'm called out. I don't like that I have to show my video. And I said, oh, they just don't like engaging. We wouldn't allow a student to come into a class and say, hey, doc, I'm going to sit in the back corner, put my head down. I'm not going to say anything, and put a hoodie over my head. Leave me alone. We wouldn't allow, in a training that was face-to-face, an employee to go off in a corner with a laptop and earphones in and facing the wall and not fully engage. So we have to make sure that we set some social norms in organizations, right? To make sure that people are held accountable, because what's happening is the trainers are getting dinged. Or reviews, right? So leaders also have to understand that some of the feedback that you'll get maybe from some during these trainings can be shrouded in some negativity that is misplaced. Some people literally don't want to do the work, but then we'll project where it goes. And so we have to be careful of saying, oh, well, a certain population feels uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable work. Like
for everybody.
For everybody. And so we have to take that as a fixed variable and not look at it the same way we look at others.
And even if they don't all talk, we need to make sure they're at least present, right? Not all mute. I mean, not their video is there still. You may not talk. Maybe you're an introvert, right? Maybe you don't want to engage. But being held accountable, did you complete certain tasks? Did you do certain trainings, right? Were there certain assignments given to you to help you work on this? Did you do them? If not, you need to be held accountable for that.
So part of the difficulty for leaders to have this conversation around race is also how emotional it is for a lot of people. People come into this conversation with, first of all, their lens, right? They bring their lived experience to their perspective around protests and everything that's happening in the country at the moment, and therefore now in workplaces. And some leaders may feel like they don't want to have the conversation because they don't know how to handle the emotional part of it. And so I know that some of the work that we've done together is when we guide our client leaders on how to have conversations around race in the workplace, that we set up a construct, right? There's expectations, there's a framework around to have a meaningful conversation. Dr. Gibson, do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, our rules of engagement, you mean, right? In terms of, look, we let people know this is going to be uncomfortable. And as we said in the beginning, to kind of sit in that feeling and not let that decrease your awareness, this aha moment that you can have. But if you sit in those negative emotions, you're really going to miss out. And as Dr. Charles was saying, now you're going to say, oh, this training sucked. But you already came there with a negative framework. You let that uncomfortability kind of steer you away versus letting you get in there. So it's really great that we set those rules of engagement to allow people to understand this is a comfortable space, even when it's uncomfortable, right? I like to tell my clients, look, I'm going to make you laugh before I make you cry, really, because I've done the research. I found if you make people feel those negative emotions, you know what it does to their Black biases? makes them worse sometimes. So what it does is it's certain people, particularly those who lack open-mindedness, if you send them that way and don't set up these rules of engagement at first and try to help them stay in a positive space, it could make the training and the experience worse and their biases worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's what leads to that mental rigidity.
Yes.
So mental rigidity increases bias. So if you come in saying, oh, why are they making us do all of this?
Mm-hmm.
Then of course you're not going to receive, right?
But it's so funny. I've had clients or trainees who came in like that. Oh, why do I have to be here? It's early in the morning on Friday, but by the time I'm done and I use certain psychological strategies that help them deal with that uncomfortability, they're like, you know what? I'm glad I came. They want my phone number. They want to be friends, right? So you have to use certain strategies with folks like that help them come to the table because they already came in with personality types and mind states about this. Mm-hmm. My mom always says it's better with sugar than salt. And so I use that in my framework.
It matters.
Yes.
Because it does two things. It disarms.
Mm-hmm.
It disarms and it also creates relationship and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's really key.
Yeah. And I think that's super important to having these conversations about this work. You know, there has to be trust built. I've had clients, I think Michelle, even on a call, you once said, do not give your email address out, right? Because like, hey, if you guys need to debrief, reach out to me. And it's like, no, because then everybody will. And I think it's because, and Dr. Gibson, I'm sure can attest to this, it feels like counseling and therapy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it feels
one in that situation. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, can I be my best friend? Help me.
Yes.
Right?
I'm like, I'm the right one because I'm an expert in this.
Hundreds of people times tens of clients, you know, we can become
right. Exactly. So as we wrap up this conversation, because I want to make sure it's really meaningful, especially for our company leaders and potential company leaders. The first is, there are risks associated if you shy away from having these conversations because you have employees and team members who want and desperately need to have the conversation. By not having the conversation about race, you could actually not just create risk, but you can create productivity issues, you create stress and all other kinds of things that you look at in terms of retention. Exactly. So there's that. The second thing is you don't have to be brown skinned to have a conversation about race as a leader. You just need the right framework and understanding, just like you had the right framework and understanding in your training on how to become a leader when you're talking about performance reviews and leading and hiring and interviewing.
Right.
Just about knowing what to do. And that's what we help with in addition to that. And the third thing is, as I think about our conversation is don't make the mistake of just assuming that your Black employees are the experts and the source of all of what you need, because they may not be the expert. In fact, there's a high likelihood they're not the expert. And you probably need more than one person to guide you through this conversation. And of course, that's what yes.
Something else is very important.
Yes.
Please don't diversity counsel yourself away from solving the problem.
Ooh,
I'm seeing excuse me. I'm seeing so many companies say, we're creating a diversity and inclusion council. And then what? With what metrics? With what accountability? With who on it? Who's paying attention to governance? With what resources? What power do they have? Or are we just convening to talk? And now taking those people who have been the choir that have been wanting to have the conversation anyway, away from the work, and the people who haven't been engaged still now aren't. So please be careful with that. Yes, I do believe there needs to be a tribe of people in an organization that are collectively thinking about and leading the organization. That's always important. But it is not the primary solution. And it's a very easy first step that a lot of people sit in and stay in too long. So just be mindful of that.
Very good point. We've actually guided some of our clients along those lines. This is the work that we do here at Biassync. We help companies mitigate, assess, and manage unconscious bias in the workplace. And certainly the work that we do now is even more important than it's ever been. We're rooted in science and research. We have experts working with us like Dr. Charles and Dr. Gibson to help our clients achieve their diversity, equity, inclusion goals through mitigating unconscious bias and also creating more inclusive environments. So if you'd like more information, of course, please reach out to us. We're findable on the internet, biassync.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. And most important, we hope that this conversation has at least had some moments of insightful tidbits that can help you think about how you're showing up in your organization. Thank you, Dr. Charles. Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
Thank you, Michelle.